Time is a continuous line, but there are moments when that line breaks, where the logic of civilization gives way to absolute chaos. Between the years 1939 and 1945, the world did not just experience a war. It experienced an eclipse of humanity. It was a period when technology, instead of serving progress, was refined for mass annihilation, where ideologies of hatred turned neighbors into enemies and nations into machines of extermination. In this video, we will not just list dates and names. We will delve into the depths of the conflict that defined who we are today. We will understand how the resentment of a humiliated nation turned into a global conflagration. We will walk to the mud of Stalingrad, fly over the burning skies of London, and feel the weight of the deafening silence that followed the atomic explosions in Japan. This is the story of World War II, a conflict that involved over 100 million military personnel, mobilized 70 nations, and resulted in a death toll that defies our comprehension. Between 60 and 80 million lives lost. Prepare yourself. What you are about to see and hear is the definitive account of the greatest cataclysm in human history. To understand 1939, we must first understand 1918. World War I ended not with a lasting peace, but with a bitter armistice. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, was less a peace agreement and more a death sentence for European stability. Germany was forced to accept the war guilt clause, losing 13% of its European territory and all its overseas colonies. Imagine a proud nation whose borders were redrawn by foreigners, whose economy was crushed by impossible war reparations, and whose army was reduced to a glorified police force. Inflation in the 1920s reached such absurd levels that people carried wheelbarrows full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. In the scenario of despair, extremist voices gained traction, and no voice was more hypnotic and dangerous than that of Adolf Hitler, a former Austrian corporal who found in politics the stage for his resentment. Hitler did not invent anti-Semitism or German nationalism, but he distilled them into a potent political weapon. He promised what the people most desired: order, bread, and pride. In 1933, through a mixture of political manipulation and street violence by his brown shirts, Hitler became chancellor. In a short time, German democracy was dead. The Third Reich was born under the sign of the swastika, promising 1,000 years of dominion. But Germany was not alone in its thirst for expansion. In Italy, Benito Mussolini had already established fascism since 1922, dreaming of a new Roman Empire that would dominate the Mediterranean. And in the Far East, Japan, a nation that modernized at record speed, felt suffocated on its islands. For the Japanese military, the only way to ensure the empire's survival was the conquest of Asia. In 1931, they invaded Manchuria. In 1937, they launched a full-scale invasion of China, marked by atrocities such as the Nanjing Massacre, where hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed. While these regimes armed themselves to the teeth, what were the Western democracies doing? Great Britain and France, exhausted by the Great War, adopted the policy of appeasement. They watched, almost paralyzed, as Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland in 1936, annexed Austria in the Anschluss of 1938, and demanded the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned from Munich in 1938, waving a piece of paper and declaring he had achieved peace for our time. He did not know that Hitler considered him a worm. For the Nazi dictator, every concession was just a sign of weakness that encouraged him to ask for more. The final blow to world diplomacy came on August 23, 1939. The world awoke to the unbelievable news of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Hitler and Stalin, the two greatest tyrants of the century, had made a deal. Publicly, it was a non-aggression pact. Secretly, they divided Poland and the Baltic states as if they were slices of a cake. Now, there was nothing left to stop Hitler. The countdown to the apocalypse had reached zero. September 1st, 1939. At 4:45 a.m., the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on the Polish military depot at Westerplatte was not just the beginning of an invasion. It was the birth of a new era of warfare. The Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, was not just about speed. It was about surgical coordination between air and land. While the Luftwaffe destroyed the Polish Air Force on the ground and bombed railways and communication centers, Panzer divisions tore through Polish defenses. Poland fought with desperate bravery. Stories of Polish cavalry attacking German tanks are largely propaganda myths, but the reality was equally tragic. A 19th century army trying to stop a 20th century war machine. On September 17th, the final stab came from the east. Fulfilling the secret protocol of the pact with Hitler, the Soviet Union invaded Poland. Trapped between two giants, Poland fell in less than 6 weeks. Warsaw was reduced to rubble. Great Britain and France declared war. But for months, almost nothing happened on the Western Front. It was a phony war or a sitzkrieg. But Hitler was not idle. He was sharpening his blade. In April 1940, he swallowed Denmark in a single day and conquered Norway in an audacious campaign to secure Swedish iron ore. Then, on May 10, 1940, the real nightmare began. Germany launched its offensive against the West. The Allies expected an attack through Belgium, as in World War I. But Hitler and his generals, like Erich von Manstein, had a bolder plan. They sent their armored divisions through the Ardennes, a region of dense forests that the French believed be impenetrable for tanks in a few days. The Germans had bypassed the famous Maginot Line and encircled the best Allied troops. The French army, considered the strongest in Europe, collapsed in just 6 weeks. On June 14th, German troops marched under the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. But amidst the disaster, there was a miracle. At Dunkirk, over 330,000 British and French soldiers were rescued from the beaches by an improvised fleet of warships, yachts, fishing boats, and even lifeboats. They lost all their equipment, but saved the army that would one day return to liberate Europe. With France out of action, Hitler turned his attention to Great Britain. "The Battle of France is over," said Churchill. "I expect that the Battle of Britain is about to begin." During the summer and autumn of 1940, the skies over England became the most important battlefield in the world. The Luftwaffe tried to destroy the Royal Air Force, RAF, to pave the way for a sea invasion, Operation Sea Lion. British cities, especially London, were mercilessly bombed in what became known as the Blitz. But the RAF pilots, exhausted and outnumbered, resisted. The innovative use of radar and the unwavering determination of the British people forced Hitler to suffer his first major strategic defeat. Frustrated by British resistance, Hitler made the most fateful decision of his life. He decided that to defeat Great Britain, he first needed to destroy the Soviet Union. On June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa was launched. More than 3 million German soldiers and their allies crossed the Soviet border along a 2,900-kilometer front. It was a war of annihilation from day one. Hitler ordered Soviet political commissars to be executed immediately. For the Nazis, this was a racial crusade against Jewish Bolshevism. The Red Army was caught by surprise. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were encircled and captured in gigantic encirclement battles in Minsk, Smolensk, and Kiev. By October, German patrols could see the Kremlin towers through their binoculars. But General Winter was coming. Sound effects: howling wind, falling snow, the sound of boots marching on ice. Temperatures dropped to 30 degrees below zero. The oil in German tanks froze. Soldiers, still wearing summer uniforms, suffered from frostbite. On December 5, 1941, Soviet General Georgy Zhukov launched a massive counteroffensive with Siberian troops trained for extreme cold. The Germans were pushed back. The dream of a quick victory in the east was dead. While snow fell in Moscow, the sun rose over the Pacific to illuminate a new disaster. Japan, led by General Hideki Tojo and Emperor Hirohito, felt cornered by U.S. oil embargoes. They decided on a preemptive strike that would cripple the American fleet and allow the conquest of Southeast Asia. December 7, 1941. At 7:48 a.m., the first wave of Japanese planes attacked the naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. In 2 hours, 18 ships were sunk or damaged, including 8 battleships. More than 2,400 Americans died. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of the attack, is said to have stated, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." The next day, the United States declared war on Japan. 3 days later, in an act of solidarity with its Japanese ally, Hitler declared war on the United States. It was a second fatal mistake. Now, the world's greatest industrial power was fully mobilized against the Axis. The war now encompassed all continents and oceans, from the jungles of Burma to the deserts of North Africa, from the steppes of Russia to the remote islands of the Pacific. Humanity was in a life-or-death struggle. The year 1942 began with the Axis at its peak. Japan had conquered the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies. In Russia, the Germans were preparing for a new summer offensive. In North Africa, the Desert Fox, Erwin Rommel, was at the gates of Egypt. But in June 1942, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the fate of naval warfare changed in just 5 minutes. The Battle of Midway was a triumph of military intelligence. American codebreakers, led by Joseph Rockefeller, managed to break the Japanese naval code Jan 25. They knew exactly where and when the Japanese would attack. On June 4th, American SPD Dauntless dive bombers found the Japanese fleet while their planes were being refueled on deck. In a devastating attack, 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, the heart of the Imperial Navy, were sunk. Japan would never recover from this loss. Meanwhile, in the scorching desert of Egypt, British and Commonwealth forces, under the command of General Bernard Montgomery, faced Rommel's Afrika Korps. Sound effects: sound of wind blowing sand, the roar of 88mm cannons, and the rumble of Crusader and Panzer III tanks. In October 1942, at the Second Battle of El Alamein, Montgomery launched Operation Lightfoot. It was a brutal battle of attrition through minefields known as the Devil's Gardens. After 12 days of intense fighting, Rommel's forces were forced to retreat. It was the first major British land victory of the war. As Churchill said, "Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat." But the true heart of darkness was in Russia, Stalingrad, an industrial city on the banks of the Volga River that became the tomb of the German Sixth Army. Hitler was obsessed with capturing the city named after his rival. What followed was a Rattenkrieg, or Rat War. Soldiers fought for every floor of every factory, for every sewer, for every pile of rubble. In November 1942, Soviet General Alexander Vasilevsky launched Operation Uranus. In a giant pincer movement, the Red Army encircled 250,000 German soldiers and their allies within the city. Hitler forbade surrender, promising air supplies that never arrived in sufficient quantity. On February 2, 1943, Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus surrendered what remained of his army. More than 800,000 Axis soldiers died, were wounded, or captured. It was a definitive turning point in Europe. From Stalingrad onwards, Nazi Germany would be in constant retreat. In the summer of 1943, the Germans attempted one last desperate offensive at Kursk, the largest tank battle in history. More than 6,000 tanks and 2 million soldiers clashed in a tiny space. The Soviets, now masters of defense in depth, repelled the attack. Strategic initiative now belonged entirely to the Allies. Hitler's ideology divided humanity into superior races and subhumans, honor mention. At the top were the Aryans. At the bottom, Jews, Roma, Slavs, and others. What began with discriminatory laws in 1935 evolved into open-air massacres by the Einsatzgruppen death squads. In the Soviet Union, where over 1 million Jews were shot in mass graves. But in January 1942, at the Wannsee Conference, Nazi leaders planned a final solution: industrialized extermination. Extermination camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, and Belzec were built with a single purpose: to kill the largest number of people in the shortest possible time. Victims arrived in overcrowded freight trains, were selected for slave labor, or sent directly to gas chambers disguised as showers. Their bodies were then burned in crematoria. 6 million Jews were murdered. 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population disappeared. But the Nazis also killed millions of others: Soviet prisoners of war, Poles, Roma, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and people with disabilities. The Holocaust remains a definitive proof that technology and bureaucracy, when divorced from morality, can produce absolute evil. In Asia, the horror was equally real. The Imperial Japanese Army treated conquered peoples with medieval brutality. In the Nanjing Massacre in 1937, an estimated 300,000 Chinese civilians were killed. Thousands of women were forced into sexual slavery as comfort women. And in Unit 731, Japanese doctors conducted biological and chemical experiments on living prisoners, including vivisections without anesthesia. World War II was not just a fight for territory. It was a fight for the soul of humanity, and the cost of that fight was being paid in innocent blood in every corner of the globe. The year 1944 was the year of liberation. In the East, the Red Army launched Operation Bagration in June, destroying the German Army Group Center and advancing into Poland in the south. The Allies had captured Rome on June 4th, but the world was waiting for a single day. June 6, 1944, D-Day. Operation Overlord was the largest amphibious invasion in history. Under the supreme command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, a colossal armada of 7,000 ships and 11,000 aircraft crossed the English Channel. More than 150,000 American, British, and Canadian soldiers landed on 5 beaches in Normandy: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Sound effects: sound of MG-42 machine guns, grenade explosions, and the shouts of advancing soldiers. On Omaha Beach, the landing was almost a disaster. German defenses, led by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, were formidable. Thousands of young Allied soldiers died before even touching the sand. But individual courage and Allied air superiority prevailed. By the end of the day, the Allies had a foothold in Europe. Hitler's fortress was being breached in August. Paris was liberated. By the end of 1944, the Western Allies were on Germany's borders. Hitler, increasingly isolated and paranoid in his headquarters, attempted one last desperate counteroffensive in the Ardennes in December. The Battle of the Bulge was a brutal fight in the snow, but German reserves were exhausted. The road to Berlin was open. By the spring of 1945, Germany was being crushed. The Western Allies crossed the Rhine, while the Red Army launched its final assault on Berlin in April. Soundtrack: heavy music, sounds of collapsing buildings, and the sound of Katyusha rockets. The Battle of Berlin was an apocalyptic urban combat. Hitler, hidden in his underground Führer bunker, ordered children and elderly people to fight against Soviet tanks. On April 30th, 1945, with Soviet troops just blocks away, Adolf Hitler committed suicide. On May 8th, Nazi Germany signed an unconditional surrender. Victory in Europe Day, or V-Day, was celebrated with joy around the world. But the war in the Pacific was not yet over. Japan, despite having its navy destroyed and its cities burned by American bombing, refused to surrender. Battles on islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa were bloodbaths. In Okinawa, over 100,000 Japanese soldiers and 12,000 Americans died in 82 days of fighting. Kamikaze pilots crashed their planes into Allied ships in suicide attacks. American leaders, fearing that an invasion of Japan would cost 1 million Allied lives, made a decision that would change the world forever. Sound effects: a deep silence, followed by a deafening and grave roar. On August 6, 1945, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb in history on the city of Hiroshima. The explosion annihilated the city instantly, killing 80,000 people on the spot. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Simultaneously, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria. Faced with total destruction and no hope of victory, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15th. On September 2nd, 1945, aboard the battleship USS Missouri, the surrender documents were signed. World War II had finally come to an end. The cost of World War II is almost incomprehensible. An estimated 60 to 80 million people lost their lives, most of them civilians. Europe and parts of Asia were in ruins. Economies were destroyed, entire populations were displaced. But from the ashes of war, a new world began to emerge. The United Nations was founded in 1945, an attempt to create a global forum for peace and cooperation. The Nuremberg and Tokyo trials sought to hold war criminals accountable, establishing principles of international justice that resonate to this day. The war also accelerated the process of decolonization. Empires crumbled and new nations emerged, eager for self-determination. However, the end of World War II also marked the beginning of a new conflict. The Cold War, a decades-long ideological struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union that would shape global politics for the next half-century. World War II was a crucible that forged a modern world. It taught us the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition, racial hatred, and political appeasement. But it also showed us the incredible resilience of the human spirit, the power of unity in the face of tyranny, and enduring hope for a better future. As we look back at the years 1939 to 1945, we are reminded that history is not just a collection of facts and dates. It is a living lesson, a warning, and an inspiration. It is up to us to remember, to learn, and to ensure that the eclipse of humanity never happens again. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If this video helped you better understand World War II, please subscribe to the channel, and share it with anyone who is also passionate about history. Until next time.